I really love the B-29 airplane. I always have, and I always will. I love the look of it. I love the sound of the four engines when they're running, 2,200 horsepower each. It's a great sound, and the airplane, after all, brought me through World War II without a scratch, and I'm forever grateful for that. I enlisted when I was 17 and a half. My dad didn't want me to be drafted, so he signed for me with my mother, and I got into the Cadet Corps, and I went through basic training and all the stuff that leads up to primary training. Got into primary training at George Field in Lawrenceville, Illinois. As we finished primary training, they decided that they were making airplanes less frequently than they were making pilots. So they washed our whole class out, and we got the opportunity to go to B-29 Bombardier, Navigator, or Engineer flight school. So when that happened, I chose to be a flight engineer, and was sent to Amarillo Army Air Base in Texas. From there, we went to Kearney, Nebraska. They made up a crew there, and we started training on the B-29 for 2 or 3 weeks. We flew to Travis Air Force Base near San Francisco, and then we flew from there to Honolulu, and from there to the Marshall Islands, from there to Saipan. I was flying missions before my 19th birthday. We were not frightened so much as just anticipating what might happen. We really didn't know what to expect. We heard horror stories from a lot of people, and who should probably not have passed them on, but they did. On the day of a typical mission, you get up at about 6 o'clock in the morning. You get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, have a breakfast, and then get to work on the airplane, making certain that everything was operating correctly. Then you went to the briefing. At the briefing, you were told what altitude you were going to fly, what you were going to do when you get there. Every detail of the mission, all you had to do was execute it. So the planning was done by the operations officers, and they did it very well. In a daytime mission, you taxi out of the revetment, go to the active runway, and you start your takeoff run and climb to 5,000 feet. At 5,000, you send the bombardier back to arm the bombs, and then you turn north and follow your prescribed altitude and direction until Iwo Jima was taken back by our Marines in March 1945. We didn't have any aircraft cover, so we flew the entire mission on our own and dropped our bombs and came home, hopefully. Now, after March of 1945, our friendly little P-51s would come up and take us all the way in. Night missions were a little safer from that standpoint, but we still had the everlasting anti-aircraft fire at the other end when we tried to go in on the target. As the sights and sounds of an attack have to be experienced to really understand it. Everybody's yelling. Everybody is pointing out bogeys. We got one coming in from 9 o'clock. We got another one coming in from 12. Then the tail gunner would say, we got one coming on our 6. And the central fire control officer is activating the port gun or the starboard guns. He's firing himself, and it's chaos. If you've ever heard 50 caliber machine guns, 4 in a turret, firing at the same time, you know there's chaos. So when you were in the battle, there was a lot of noise going on in the airplane as well. As over the intercom, the pilot, of course, is trying to close formation with everybody else so that we can tighten up and have a good crossfire situation so that the fighters can only attack from the perimeters. They can't go through us because we'll get them for sure if they go through us. Yeah. So that's the kind of situation. It didn't always happen. We had milk runs. We had times when we were flying shorter missions where we never encountered anything except always anti-aircraft fire. Our aircraft was hit many times. They didn't do much in terms of decompressing the airplane or anything like that. But one time we did have a pretty heavy anti-aircraft fire and came right up through my feet and hit me in the ankle. And with that little bitty wound, I got a Purple Heart. But fortunately, it didn't hit any wiring or tubing or anything of that nature.
Did you fly both kinds of bombing raids, the higher altitude hitting aircraft factories with 500-pound bombs, for instance, and then also the low altitude ones with incendiaries? Did you fly both times?
We flew both kinds of missions, the so-called strategic bombing, high altitude, and aimed at an engine plant or an aircraft factory or something like that. And that was early in the game. We did that all the time when we first started to fly. Until March of 1945, they got sick and tired of us being ineffective doing that for two reasons. The first reason being that the weather was always awful, winds were high, and the bomb site wasn't capable of the high winds. So that was one reason we were ineffective with fragmentation bombs. The other reason we were not effective was that very soon the Japanese figured out that we could pick out a factory and knock it out. So what they did was they broke down their assembly lines into pieces and brought them into cottage factories. They did that for two reasons. One was to hide them from us, and also to put in the effect of collateral damage to the civilians and so forth, which they thought the Americans were too weak to overcome. So they felt that we would not bomb as effectively if they put them in homes. That did not keep us from doing that. The commander of the 20th Air Force decided to call in Kurt LeMay from Europe and bring him to find out why we were not being effective in bombing. And LeMay got into one of our airplanes and accompanied us on a mission. He wanted to see for himself firsthand. So he accompanied us on this mission, which was a minimal success. And when we got back, he went into a meeting and he said, from now on, high altitude bombing is out. You will now bomb from 12,000 feet or below, and we will fill the airplane with incendiary and burn them out. And that's what we did to the end of the war.
I've heard stories that they started taking all the guns out of the B-29s except the tail gun when they started doing that low altitude incendiary. Did they do that to your airplane? They
did not do it to our airplane. They kept us armed because we could carry the weight and we could take the same amount of incendiaries as they could from further south. So I'm sure that there were airplanes that had the guns stripped from them to reduce the weight so that they could get a heavier bomb load in there. But they were from airplanes that were flying further south of us. We never had a mission aborted outgoing. All of our problems with the engines seemed to be very close to the target or on the way home. I was asked how many times we came home with all 4 engines running. And I looked in my logbook, and only 12 times did we have all 4 engines running when we got home. Often we came home on 3 engines, very often.
When you were coming home on 3 engines, could you come on 3 engines almost all the way from the target?
Yes. We could sustain that flight on this airplane very easily with 3 engines. Yeah. We could maintain altitude and fly home very comfortably on 3 engines.
Did you always fill the fuel tank completely full, or did you adjust that trying to just maximize bomb load and not necessarily fill them all the way up?
We did not always fill up the tank completely. There are a couple of reasons for that. Logistically, if you didn't need it, you didn't take it. But, and we flew a lot of short missions where we would put 4,000 gallons aboard, something like that. But when we went to someplace like Tokyo, Yokohama area, 7,200 gallons was normal.
Did you ever take the additional tanks, the ones called Tokyo tanks, for a really long mission?
We never had to do that. I don't know if the other squadrons in our group did, but we never had to do that. If we were going on an extra long mission, which I would call 14 hours, something like that, we would take less of a bomb load. Yeah.
Did you ever land on Iwo Jima?
We were forced to land on Iwo Jima one time because we did have 2 engines go out. Fortunately, nothing needed replacement. We just had the mechanics repair the engine. It took most of a day, and then we flew on home from there. We did that twice. 2 missions were really incorporated in my mind forever. One was when we had to ditch because we ran out of fuel. That was done with a substitute airplane. And I'm giving that excuse because I was the one that calculated the fuel load. That was one of the engineer's jobs. And I calculated it based on the fuel consumption rate of my airplane. The substitute airplane burned far more fuel. We didn't find out until we left. But I put on the load of fuel that I would have had for our airplane. Well, the ditching was a smashing success, but the one I hate was the night of March 9th when almost 500 airplanes left on a mission to bomb Yokohama and Tokyo. The first group flew in an X pattern so that they could mark the spot and keep us away from the Imperial Palace. We could not bomb the Imperial Palace. But they would mark the spot, and then all the rest of the airplanes would use that marker to direct our bombing. The problem was the 497th, the group I belonged to, the 497th was the last group in. And we're flying about 8,000 feet. And the airplane was in gigantic turbulence from the fires that had already been lighted by previous groups. And so there was a lot of turbulence from that. And the other thing was that we could smell the burning flesh of the civilians. We completed our 35 missions, and we were ready to be rotated home. But then the command put out a request for volunteers who would be willing to fly 3 more missions to resupply the prison camps abandoned shortly after the second bomb was dropped. The prison camps were vacated by the guards, and they left our prisoners there without water, without food. Everybody volunteered, but our crew was one of the crews that was selected to go ahead and do it. So the first mission, we took our mattress covers, which were canvas bags about 4 by 7 feet long, and The guys on the ground loaded all of the supplies that they could get that we had available in terms of medicines and food and water, boots, jackets, blankets, stuffed them into these bags. We put those in the bomb bay, and then we flew over the prison camps at about 50 feet or lower. We opened the bomb bay doors and shoved those bags out, and they bounced on roofs and on the pavement and so forth. But there was nothing in them to break anyway. We did that 3 times. Therefore, the total number of missions our crew flew, 38. One of the things I learned about war is, number one, it's kind of boring. You do a lot of waiting and a lot of preparation for a short period of time in combat, and then you wait for the next time. But the other thing that I learned was that we don't really want to do this anymore. It's inhumane. War is bad. Now, having said that, if we are again threatened by anybody, we're going to have to do it again. And if I were young enough, I would sign up to do it again. Because when it needs to be done, we have to do it. That's what I learned about war.